Welcome to another edition of Inside the War Room. Ryan Ray here, as always. Guest today, well, I say today, I'm actually recording two today, but the guest for this episode is Robert Hefner. Mr. Hefner, it's good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Someone suggested I should get on Hugh Hefner the other day, and I was like, well, I guess it's Hefner. You say it just like Hugh, right?
Yeah. It's yeah.
No relation.
Always get that one. Yeah, we just don't talk about that side of the family.
Yeah, I put on LinkedIn. I said, "Who should I have on?" And someone put Hugh Hefner and someone else that was dead. I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." Well, there we go. So I got Robert. So there we go. So give a quick introduction to the folks who don't know you. You have a blog. You're writing a book or a chapter in a book. I heard you run for president, and then maybe intergalactic senate or something. So what's going on?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the intergalactic senate. I think Elon Musk is going to invite me out there to Mars here soon. But no, for those that don't know me, I'm just an energy guy in the middle of Oklahoma. My dad always quipped with me growing up, how do you make God laugh? Tell him what your plans are. And so my plans were to get to the coast, be in technology, and here I am in Oklahoma still doing energy. So most of that's been historically in traditional energy, and then going forward, a lot of different aspects with energy policy and advocacy work, trying to get to starting to work on the coast and influence energy policy, something that my family's done through, I guess, 3 or 4 separate presidential administrations. And so kind of following in those footsteps, maybe, pondering runs for office and doing a bunch of crypto. So both mining and hedge funds, all over the place, consulting work too. So it's just throw it in a bucket and do it all.
Let's talk about energy policy, because I just got off it's a off the record discussion, so I can't say what was said, but a discussion panel with some emerging market leaders talking about energy policy, and it was myself and another gentleman that were kind of the media types that were kind of speakers, and it was interesting because he was pretty heavy on the climate change stuff, which I want to talk to you about in a minute. And I didn't want to get in a big debate. We're not debating. We're talking to these attendees. So I don't want to get a big debate with him over that. But I did make the point, which is that Africa should ignore most of the U.S. energy policy as it pertains to what we're doing, because they're not in the same spot that we are. And he kept bringing this up. And I found it interesting at the end. Someone brought up the fact that, hey, you guys are wanting to tax us to death with the Paris Climate Accords and all this stuff, and we're just now getting into the oil and gas business. And I don't know where they're from, but I'm just like, yes, which is why I didn't say anything. I was like, that's why I said what I said. Talk to me about what, in your mind, defines good energy policy.
Yeah, so I ended up throwing it up on my website, but sound energy policy ends energy poverty, and that's it. And I kind of reorganized that from lessons given to me by Dr. Scott Tinker at the University of Texas at Austin with the Switch Energy Alliance. The way he says it is a little bit different, but basically the same thing. And that is, energy does not end poverty, but you cannot end poverty without energy. And so what this idea around poverty is something that people in America don't talk about, because we're so far up the Maslow hierarchy of needs. We're at the very pinnacle of that pyramid. We have a lot of hubris and arrogance in how we interact with the world, because these people around the world, there's 2 billion people that are at the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy of need. They're looking for shelter, clean water, food. They're dealing with malnourishment and all these other issues. And so what people are very surprised to learn when I give speeches and talk at universities is that at the United Nations itself, part of their sustainability development program and those sustainable development goals, poverty is the biggest issue among their millions of stakeholders. All right. So poverty is the number one issue, according to the United Nations, in the world. And if you ask then, well, where does climate change rank among those priorities? And by the way, there are 17 of them. It ranks 13th. And so here in the United States, on a lot of your podcasts, a lot of the podcasts that I've been on, and of course, I'm passionate about energy policy, we tend to gravitate toward climate change as the thing that we're talking about, as well as, if you listen to at least our leadership, they tell us this is an existential threat, which really implies that they think the world's going to end and everybody's going to die and it's going to burn up and all this, Armageddon stuff, when that's just not the case.
Oh, hold on. None of them believe it. None of them believe it.
I disagree. I think they actually believe it.
Okay, I'll give you an example.
I think AOC actually believes it. I think she's bought it hook, line, and sinker.
I'll give you an
She
example.
said in 12 years, the world will end if we do not immediately cease the burning of fossil fuels. That was AOC.
Where does she live?
I have no idea. I bet you she doesn't live where you think she lives either. I bet you she lives in some penthouse $100 million place.
Okay, she lives in either New York or DC, right?
Sure.
What's next to New York and DC?
What is it?
The ocean. The one thing no, I'm being serious. Bill Gates just bought a $42 million mansion last year in San Diego on the beach.
There you go. Yeah, and insurance companies are still underwriting them.
When there's a land rush in Kansas, I'm serious. When there's a land rush in Kansas, then I will believe that these people believe what they're saying. I mean, now, let me distinguish. I'm not talking about the average Joe walking around. I'm talking about the ones who push the narrative. They do not move to the middle of the country. If you thought in 12 years the world was going to be flooded, you would be buying land and moving to the middle of the country. Your action,
or at least to higher elevations.
Okay, so that's fine. Wherever.
Yeah.
I'm saying the middle of the country. You wouldn't be staying in. You wouldn't buy beachfront property in San Diego, or you wouldn't be living in New York or DC. You would be moving inland. And so until that happens, I don't buy it. And so that's why I say I don't believe them, that they believe it. That's a separate issue of whether they're right or not. I just don't think that they believe it.
Yeah, it more likely than not is a guise under which they can perpetuate their agendas. That gets a little conspiracy theory-ish for me, but it does make a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, going back to your original question, sound energy policy ends energy poverty, and that's what this country needs to be talking about. If we're going to impose our arrogance upon other third world countries or emerging economies, that's immoral. That's wrong.
Sure.
And that needs to be a broader discussion within this whole concept of climate change.
Well, let me address the conspiracy theory point. What I would say is, last year during the pandemic, the Pentagon came out and talked about aliens. Now, I'm 35. How old are you?
35.
Okay, so we're the same age. Growing up in the 90s, I don't know if that was the most alien talk ever or not, but there was a lot of alien talk in the 90s. Movies, shows, Roswell. The Pentagon comes out in 2020 is like, yeah, they're real. Who cares? No one. Because no one actually believes in aliens. There are a few folks who do, but no one is really, it didn't even bump the needle. It doesn't, and so the alien stories now don't even bump the needle. We like to think that we believe in them. We're caught up in the idea of them. But when push comes to shove, if you really thought that the Pentagon had proof of aliens, you would be freaking out right now, because everything that they say about them is that they are far more advanced technology than what we have. And no one is wigging out. No one's losing their mind. No one's talking about tripling the military budget. There's no United Nations resolution to fix the alien problem because no one actually believes in it. So when I say that they don't believe in the climate change stuff, I'm saying that their actions speak louder than their words to me. In the same way that someone says they believe in aliens, and then there's like,
I see how you draw that parallel. I'm fine with that. We can get into the theologic, discussions at another time on whether or not God's capable of creating other worlds that can interact with this one, and quantum physics. I don't
believe in the aliens either. I'm saying if you did, and the Pentagon, in all seriousness here, in 1997, if the Pentagon would have released Area 51's location and said they're aliens, you would expect the response to be different than what we've seen over the past year. And so at the end of the day, there's a book.
Maybe that's why China's building up their entire military really heavy right now.
There's a book on my desk over here someone wanted me to read. It's called The Black Swan. And the person,
great book.
Okay, so I haven't read it. That's
authored by a fellow Lebanese man, Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
So my understanding is the book argues, and this is what's told to me by a friend, the book argues that most of major life events are changed or impacted by these black swan events, COVID-19, 9/11, World War II, whatever it is. Sure. And I haven't read the book, So what I'm about to say is just my judgment off what was said. I said, well, okay, well, that's partially true. However, the real truth is you find out in those moments what you actually believe. Now, let's distinguish a couple things. You getting shot in the middle of the street, black swan event. Okay, that's one thing. But when 9/11 happened, what we saw from the conservatives was they didn't really believe in what they have espoused as a limited government. Because ever since then, the government has expanded, especially defense. Now, you may think that's the right thing. You may think that's the wrong thing. The point is, they really didn't believe what they had said all these years about this stuff. In 2020, a lot of people said they believe in liberty and freedom. What you found is they didn't. So the Black Swan event only exposes, and maybe he says it in the book, I don't know. The point I think was, from what I heard, was that this is what changed your mind. So I don't know. It's just
to explain the Black Swan, like just the concept, the theory of the Black Swan to begin with, for anybody listening that hasn't read the book, it's you can go through your entire life, and everyone around the world writes down and puts onto a blog or you're inventorying these experiences with swans, and every single one of those swans that has been observed and put into the ledger are white worldwide for 1,000 years. The point is, you still can't refute the statement that the black swan exists. All right. But all you have to do to refute that, or to affirm it rather, is to actually observe just one. That's all it takes. Just observing one black swan.
That's right.
To say that black swans exist, right? So use it in the alien context.
Sure.
We have not observed an actual alien. Maybe the Pentagon has that they didn't release. I don't know. But so far, not even the Pentagon in that release has stated that they have observed an actual alien. They have observed things that they can't explain, sure. But that doesn't mean
they observe things that they claim they can't explain, which is different. But
sure. And no one, because of that, no one is able to say that aliens don't exist. Right. That's a refutable statement that doesn't work.
Sure.
Within that logical context.
Sure.
So that's really what the Black Swan is partially about. He moves that into saying, okay, over the course of history, we've observed only white swans. No one was predicting this black swan, right?
Right.
So you can't within a financial context, you cannot model risk based upon something that you weren't aware of in the first place. Maybe that's the best way to put the book into context.
Sure. Yeah. And the logic part of it is an easy concept. It'd be like saying, do dinosaurs exist today? And you say, no. Say, well, prove it.
Yeah.
You can't, you cannot be at all spots at all times to therefore disprove that they just really don't exist. So there's strong evidence to indicate. So yeah, I think that kind of gets lost in modern public discourse a lot. So back to policy, which is where we got started.
Aliens,
yes. Let's talk about. When we talk about aliens, talk about whatever. That's why I created this show, so that I can talk about whatever I want to do. Because all my other shows are pretty niche. I want a show I can talk about whatever I want to do, and so we can talk about whatever. Energy policy, climate, and poverty. To your point about poverty, let's talk about that for a second. I have been in Honduras and Nicaragua, in what the World Health Organization has dubbed some of the most poorest parts of those countries. Extreme poverty. It's the thing about extreme poverty is it's ugly, it's brutal, it's heartbreaking, it's overwhelming, it's depressing. Like it is a wide range of emotions that you feel when you go to a mass populated area of extreme poverty. It is hard to deal with.
Yeah.
You get there and you're like, okay, you know what? If we just did this, and you're like, no, because then, and if we just did that, and like a couple hours in, you kind of have given up on trying to solve the problem. You're like, well, what do you need me to do? Just do something here to help you while I'm here. And it is a very complicated problem. But to your point earlier, having access to energy and clean water and shelter, those are just the very basic needs that those people have. And I'm a little bit concerned that from the U.S. or the West perspective, that when we talk about energy policy or energy practice or whatever, what energy source you should use, that we are, I'm not saying we have to solve that problem, but we are compounding the issues that you see in those communities. They have a lot of problems on their own, but then we're saying, well, you can't use coal. That's not good enough. Or, nuclear would never be an option for you guys. Or, and these are complex problems on their own. And our policy that we want to export to the world is not helping, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, globally, when you look at those situations, you can break it down into the Western developed economies versus the non-Western developed economies, I think. And that's really what we're talking about here. Is it right for us? This is one atmosphere, right? It doesn't matter. Atmosphere doesn't have borders. And they're saying that if you emit more carbon into that atmosphere, which stays there for 100 years or whatever, you're just constantly adding to it, and it's constantly getting more and more and more. Even if you cease emitting today, it's still there and it's not going away. All right. So if you then allow Africa or African countries or India in this case, maybe to utilize coal to grow their economies so that they can end poverty within their own countries, they're going to be admitting that into that one world atmosphere, and it's going to create that problem that everybody's talking about. So the only way, literally, according to what that side of the science suggests, is to literally cease all emissions probably 20 years ago of carbon dioxide, period. And then go net negative in figuring out a way to sequester it out of the atmosphere and put it into something that's a carbon sink, like plastics actually are. And so you've got a problem there. Do you care about people, or do you care about the earth more than you care about people? This possibility of risk is that you actually are so hubristic, you don't even understand the science of it as it is today. That's going to require technologies that don't even exist yet to combat it. That's so extreme that you're going to ruin entire economies over it, over something that might happen. That's basically a tail risk event. You care more about that than you do humanity. That's a effed up notion to me. But let's bring it to the United States. Let's talk about energy policy here, because that's what we can control. I think it was Bloomberg, maybe it was Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago. They ran an article about how millennials making over $100,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, there's a lot of response, a lot of passion that comes into that, injected into that discussion, especially on my Twitter feed, where people are saying, "Oh my God, cry me a river. These people are making six figures and they live paycheck to paycheck." I have no sympathy for them. F off. But I think if you dig deeper into what's actually going on, we're losing the American middle class in this country. The cost for a millennial, you and me, we're among the oldest of them, but the cost for a millennial to live is exponentially higher, inflationary adjusted, than it was for the previous generations. Meanwhile, we make 20% less than those previous generations, again, inflationary adjusted. So what used to be the case, the American dream, was to be able to create a middle-class lifestyle on a single earner income. That's not possible anymore, right?
It's harder.
And so, yeah. And I think I'm speaking in averages and means and modes, right? There's always that distribution, but I'm speaking in those terms. So in this case, I think that we've been more sensitive. We are more sensitive than ever with regard to financial decisions and economic decisions in this country. So if we're going to discuss combating climate change by increasing the cost of electricity, that's going to be borne by those people that already can't afford it. We're talking about literally decimating the American middle class. It might cease to exist. And so I think we need to be more thoughtful in how sensitive that middle segment of our economy is. They're very sensitive right now. They're living paycheck to paycheck on probably two incomes and still living paycheck to paycheck. That's not the American dream. It's not what I was told growing up was the American dream. What about you?
Well, I mean, I think, it's interesting because if you look at one of the big drivers of that is home cost, right? So you talk about where do you have to work and what does it cost to live there, and we always talk about inflation and a negative. It's, oh man, look at inflation affects the economy. The one place we'd ever talk about it negatively is home prices. We call that appreciation.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be that way or should be that way, but it is kind of been lost. I just sold my house the other day. And in 4 years, I made $149,000. I had that for 4 years. We didn't make any. We made a few small improvements here and there, some new floors, but still had a lot of old fixtures. 149. I'm not saying to brag. I'm saying that's how crazy it is right now. Like crazy. Like we bought the home, for perspective, for $295. So
Mm-hmm.
do the math on that. Like, what's going on in this world? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is a weird spot to live in. And maybe
Yeah.
they held out for more, maybe not, I have no idea, but you talk about eroding the middle class. How do we deal with those type of problems? Because so here are your options. People don't buy, okay, and so they stay wherever they're at. But if they do buy, now the family that bought, I wish them well, and they can afford it. Good for them, and no ill will, and more power to them. However, the difference in income for a 295 household to a 440 household is substantial, right?
Right. Right.
Okay, well, it's the same neighborhood, it's the same neighbors, nothing changed. So how
Yeah.
do we account for that? You have energy costs, but you also have home costs, which are out of control right now, just completely out of control. I mean, we're looking to buy in a couple of years, hopefully when prices reset. Because if we paid a buck 50 over, if we got paid a buck 50 over what we paid sold for it, then what are we going to pay getting back in? So we're trying to figure out, well, maybe a year or 2 years prices reset. But it's not just energy; it's also housing costs, and we have talk
Well,
about
energy's been the opposite for decades.
yeah.
Energy, the price of a barrel of oil has not changed since 1970. Meanwhile, inflation and everything else has dramatically changed, right?
Mhm.
And you talk about mortgages and home prices, yeah, but look to healthcare. We're the most fit generation, right? In at least in modern history. Yet
Yep.
we're paying dramatically more for our insurance coverage. Why? Because generations before us made very poor, healthy living choices. So we're being punished for their choices. That doesn't seem right. And then you look to childcare costs exponentially higher as well. So if you want to have, people aren't not having kids because they don't want kids in our generation. They're not having kids because they don't feel like they can afford them. They're not buying houses. They're not living with their parents. 1 in 4 millennials lives with their parents. They're not doing that because they want to. They're doing that because they can't afford to live out on their own. You look at,
Let me push back there a little bit. So I do think prices have something to do with it, but I think we have to also acknowledge that narrative and messaging plays a role here. So if you look at China's one-child policy, obviously that was a very much implemented whenever they wanted to, and by and large it was. Now they've rolled out the three-child policy. I'll bet a decent amount of money that most families don't go from one to three because
if you actually study that, during China's one-child policy, the average number of children per woman in China was, I think, close to 3. So during their one-child policy, the average was still already 3. So that now they're just saying it's okay. It's not like women in China were only having one child. That didn't occur.
Send me some numbers on that. Let's see, because
I'll send you the numbers on that.
Because
yeah, I spent a month in China. I met with a lot of people. I had a girl with me that was my age at the time, and she was from China herself, fluent in Mandarin. We spent time in Suzhou, inland Tibet. We got all the way to Tibet. And so like I was witnessing this firsthand. I was talking with people all across that country, and they're like, no, I've got 3 kids, and these are people that were our parents' generation, right? I was with a girl that was my age.
Our parents' generation wouldn't have been in the one-child policy.
Fair enough. How old do you think the one-child policy adults would have been?
It would have been like I think the one-child policy came in place in 80. The one-child policy came in 1980 because they had the two-child policy in the 70s, and so the mid 80s.
Okay, two-child in the 70s.
And then the policy also modified in the mid 80s to allow rural parents a second child. So the rule is a little bit different than the thing, but you can more or less you could say, yeah.
So even under two-child policy, they were still in excess of that on average
in the rural areas, but not in the main. That's not where not the main cities. I mean, if you go look at the amount of,
I got the same answer everywhere I was. They were like, "Yeah, we don't pay attention to that."
Well, okay, go look at the recent report that they released on their demographic numbers.
If in America they tell you can't have guns, are you going to abide by that? If they say you can only have one gun, are you gonna be like, yeah, okay, I'm just gonna have one gun? Or if in America, I mean, people don't do just because it's stated and it's an edict. People are not going to just do because the government says that you have to do this. Similar in China, even though they're much more heavy-handed with it. That's just not what my experience has been in China, nor with the data that I've played with.
Interesting. Because if you look at the current census data, the annual growth rate was 0.53% over the past 10 years, which is down 0.5%. And they just released, I don't have the report in front of me, but their birth rate is below the replacement level. So it's not, I mean, unless you're saying that China is actually putting out numbers that would indicate a demographic collapse that they don't have,
Shocker.
trying to incentivize people to have children.
China not being honest, I can't believe that one.
Well, you know, I don't. Yeah, I would. Well, so I would suspect that. Let's see here. Well, I'm trying to find what the replacement level is.
Here in 1980, here's the number. In 1980, their population was 1 billion. They went to 1.5 billion over the next 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't nearly double your population by having one child. That's from Worldometer.
So that's from when to when?
80 to 2010. So 30 years. You double you 1.5x your population off of a one child policy or a 2-child policy. That doesn't occur. Granted, I will say this too. This is very confusing for a lot of people. When you're talking about populations, and climate change is a population problem, if you're honest about it. Those people all are consuming things, and they want to consume things that require energy. And where are you going to get that? You need that from energy dense resources. But in 1980, there were 2 billion children. I think it was age 15 and under. All right. So 1980, 2 billion children. Guess how many children there are today in that same age demographic? 2 billion. It hadn't changed. We're not growing because we're having more kids. We're growing because we're living longer.
Oh, we're definitely not having more kids. That would be the
and the richer you get as a country, the less kids you have. There's a very nice correlation there
as well, right? Okay, so if you look at China's yearly population growth, according to Worldometer, it's clearly going down. So I don't know. I have a hard time seeing why you're arguing that there's, and so that they would be having 3 kids. But okay, we can put the China demographic.
We'll play with that later. You and I we'll play with that offline.
We'll have a follow-up podcast to debate demographics. Okay,
there you go.
We do agree that the more first world status you come, the less children you have. I think there's a great book called "What to Expect When No One's Expecting." If folks are interested in that, that talks about that.
Factfulness is a really good one for that too.
Who's that?
Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Another great one for that.
I'll take that down. Okay. I'm trying to think what got us in the stupid demographic debate. I don't even remember now. But you brought up China. You said you spent some time there. Tell us about that. I'm curious because since you've.
I mean, I've been a lot of places in the world. I don't know how many countries I've been to, but I've been to some of the poorest places in the world, similar to you in your discussion. I've been to some of the wealthiest places in the world, and when I got to China, it is the only country that has been a complete culture shock. I can go anywhere else and I don't get the same culture shock that I got in China. And we started off when we flew in Beijing. So you're on the coast. Anytime you're on the coast, everybody speaks English. In fact, I was trying to speak Mandarin. And at one point, one of their business leaders that we were meeting with, because it was a U.S. delegation from the U.S. Department of, I forget what it was, Department of something to China. So we were kind of talking business. And at one point he goes, "Why are you degrading yourself?" I was like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "You're degrading yourself by speaking our native tongue. If you're educated, you need to show that you have status and you speak English." So day one, I'm trying to be respectful of their culture, but in their eyes, I'm degrading myself. And again, that was on the coast. So the moment you moved interior, it was an entirely different world again. And people speak Mandarin, right? Well, there's 8, I think there's 8 provinces in China or something like that. Maybe it's 16. And once you get into these different provinces, someone in Beijing, who I was with, a fluent person, grew up in Beijing, literally spent her whole life there, educated in the US, but she literally couldn't understand some of these people. So you get into these provinces are their own countries of themselves. And you learn very quickly how the people do not actually enjoy their life. They do what they say, they're told to do. And if they don't, they kind of there's some heavy-handed consequences. And then I got all the way to Tibet, which is kind of Western China, if you're not familiar with geography. And we had a guy that was way overweight that was with us. He was probably 400 pounds. And when he got out, these people, you're up in the mountains, you're in the Himalayas. It's a lot of hard work just to stay alive. And so this guy gets off the plane and these people run up to him and they start poking him with sticks and laughing and pointing. And it was just, that entire country is just so different than what we had. We were in one of the markets. This is the crazy story. So I look over and I'm like, what is that? And in the market, you stuff everywhere, food everywhere. And there was this stick. And on the stick, there was 3 or 4 scorpions. All right. Stingers still on. And they weren't dead. They were moving. All right. And I'm like, oh my God, look at this. And, we all huddle around. We're looking at this. And then this little tiny girl, probably 6 years old, 7 years old, comes in front of us, grabs one of the sticks and just eats them.
Wow.
And I was, a little 6-year-old, stinger and all. And I was just blown away by that. And everybody was trying to bet me. They're like, Hef, you got to do this. You got to do it. A little girl just did it. You got to do it, man. I couldn't do it. But it's an incredibly different culture. It's completely antithetical to the West. And that's not going to change. So there's trouble brewing, and whether we can deal with it now or we can deal with it later.
When you say there's trouble brewing, we can deal with it now or later, what do you mean?
Very blatantly, war. They're mobilizing an army. Their army's now the largest in the world. We've allowed that to happen. They have more. Their naval fleet is larger than the United States now. They are being increasingly aggressive against the West. They just shut down Hong Kong. They're annexing it, basically. They shut down the papers and free press, imprisoned those people in Hong Kong. I forget the name of the article or the media organization, but that happened, in the recent weeks. And now they're being increasingly aggressive with Taiwan. And, 10 years ago, all the war simulations had us winning that war against China, us protecting Taiwan, which makes all the chips in the world for semiconductors. That's why you're having car shortages right now, right? So Taiwan's incredibly important. It makes all the computer chips in the world, basically, and China wants it too. And it's part of China, quote unquote, but it somehow became its own, political beast that's a democracy. I really don't understand how that actually occurred or why China allowed that to happen, but it did. And now the war simulations are having China winning that war pretty, most of the time. And so give it a few more years, another decade or so, and a lot of these simulations don't have the United States coming out on top. They're already starting to change hands as we speak. So they're being increasingly aggressive, and we're just falling away. We're a democracy, a democratic republic. They're a communist, an authoritarian government. We just do, those two ideological differences cannot be reconciled.
So you think we should go to war with China?
I'm telling you, it's going to happen if this continues.
But what continues specifically?
They're increasing aggression and imperialism, and America, and the West's very foundational belief that the world should operate differently.
Well, I mean,
they're infringing upon everyone's rights. They're building islands in everyone else's waters. Literally, they're drudging and creating islands for military purposes. They're annexing countries. They're not respecting human rights. They're not respecting the environment. They built so much coal in the last 16 years that it equals more coal-fired generation than the United States, Mexico, and Canada combined. Do we care about climate change or not? Do we care about human rights or not? Do we care about the environment or not? You tell me.
Well, I mean, so it's one thing to say those things, but so human rights would involve, if you're going to war, human rights are a part of that as well.
Yeah, as far as they have slavery in China, and they look at what they're doing against the Muslims in Xinjiang.
The Uyghurs.
That is pretty well documented at this point.
I mean, we've covered China pretty extensively on the podcast. We've had on people about the Uyghurs. We've had Joshua Wong, an active Hong Kong protester who was jailed. So I mean, I think we've tried to cover it best we can. I'm a little concerned with the war rhetoric. A couple things. One, we spent since 1945 chasing the Russians all over the world, fighting proxy wars for no real reason. And you talk about A, climate change, or B, human rights. It seems like we didn't really care about any of that for a lot of those issues. Um, and so, China's aggression or potential aggression, I do agree with you that Taiwan, I think, is kind of the point of that how far will they push that? But if you look at their actions last year, when they got mad at Australia, they increased their imports from the U.S. They didn't decrease from the U.S., and so they're still very much dependent on the U.S. and the U.S. is dependent on them. It's not like Russia, where the economies were pretty much separate. The intermingling between the economies seems that would prevent the two countries from going to war. So that's why I'm always curious why people think their war is coming.
I am curious of that as well, but it's going to come to a head. We can't just keep turning a blind eye to things like genocide. That's antithetical to our foundational beliefs as a country. We will not let that stand. At some point, people will stand up and say, no, you can't do this. And China's going to say, F off. You don't have the power or the authority. We have the moral high ground. You are the West, and be quiet. We control you. You want renewables? You can't have it without us. We control extraction. We control processing. They have us by the balls, and they know it. And that's why they're being increasingly imperialistic in everything that they do.
Yeah. I mean, they're pushing the borders. There's no doubt about it. I don't know how far.
I mean, their top military general, I'm reading this right now, June 10th of this year, prepare for war.
Yeah, but okay.
Let's go. I mean, they're ready.
I mean, okay. Right. So part of the thing would be is that would seem to play into the exact hand that they want you to play into, which is if you're, politicians need a reason to stay in office. And one of those reasons is they create an enemy. In the US, it could be the Democrats or the Republicans. It could be Al Qaeda. It could be whatever. China, by creating US as an enemy, helps solidify their population to back their leadership. You're not going. The Chinese people don't want.
I disagree with that completely. That's a thought that works in democracy. I agree. Sun Tzu, all of that thought process, Machiavellian thought. You have to either have an incredible enemy to mobilize people in unity, or you needed a very, very noble cause. Right. That's thoughts for democracy. China is not a democracy. China says, just like Tiananmen Square, and in recent comments, they're like, yeah, we'll kill you again, unarmed. We will kill you if you do not bend the knee. It's not, we need an enemy. It's, we'll kill you.
So let's just assume that my premise is wrong. Then the opposite would be is that people would overthrow their governments around the world, and they don't do that. So there is a reason, there is a sense in which they look to their governments for stability.
Yes.
And so they're looking for stability because as bad as they are, the outside is worse. So I don't. So why?
In China, I think you have this weird thing that's never occurred before, with regard to socialism. The Russians got this wrong, and it's that nationalism. So in the United States, we've had growth in nationalism. They've written a bunch of books about that with Trumpism and his rise to power, et cetera, here, politically speaking. In China, most people talk to socialism, but they don't talk about that nationalistic element. Mm-hmm. And so they have like quasi-democracy in China, which Milton Friedman wrote and talked a lot about, actually. And then you blend that with this nationalistic kind of proud, like, oh, hey, we are now dominating the United States. We got here because of this authoritarian regime that's very heavy-handed. They kill a lot of people. They suppress everything from human rights to the environment. Doesn't matter to them. But you know what? It got us on top. So we're proud that we're on top, and we're gonna say it's okay. The means the ends justify the means. I think that's what's happening and what's going on in China from a political perspective. They're not going to challenge that because they'll die if they do. They're going to prison for life if you write about something that they don't like, for example. So who's going to stand up to that? They don't have the means to stand up to that. It's really why the founders of our country basically wanted to have the Second Amendment, so that you have at least some ability to stand up in case something like that occurred in this country.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So there's definitely some of that there's fear. No denying that. But mean, if you look at the Middle East, we were supposed to open up democracy everywhere, and that has not worked anywhere that I know of, because those people aren't looking for the same style of government that we're looking for. So I
They're very different people. That's my people.
yeah, and so I
We're
think
crazy. You just
right.
got to
Well,
leave us alone.
I don't. I mean, if you go to war, if you say, well, we're going to war with China, um, there was a podcast, and if you're about me, we get offline. I'll try to find it sent to you. It talked about the actual technical specifications of Chinese military tactics and the U.S. military tactics, and
Okay.
they were struggling to hit moving aircraft carriers with a Tomahawk, with not Tomahawk cruise missile, whatever kind of rocket or missile. And I was just like, okay, hold on, how hard is it to hit an aircraft carrier? Like that's pretty big. But they're like, well, they're struggling to do this, but then they were saying, if you listen to it at the end of the podcast, it was kind of one of those things where, what they say they can't do, we said they could do exponentially more. What we said we couldn't do, they said that we could do exponentially more. So you're kind of left going, well, who can do what? And the answer was no one knows. And they get these weird discussions and these track two diplomacies. It was like, if the U.S. were to use a nuclear bomb in your country, what would you do? And it's like, well,
Right.
we're not sure how you respond. And so I really think that so much of that is hyperbole and talk. The other thing I'll say is people in power want to stay in power. So if you're saying that the U.S. and China are going to go to war, Xi Jinping might not make it through. There's a reason Kim Jong-un ain't nuking us. He wants to stay in power. He does not want to lose. He's got a good gig from his perspective, and he doesn't want to screw that up. So he shoots a rocket off into the ocean every now and then. He walks out. He says, look at me. Let me thump my chest. I'm the big dog out here. And he goes back to eating his whatever he eats and watching 90s Bulls basketball. I do think you can't deny.
I'll leave the listeners with this. You and I disagree on this a little bit. If you want to read about this is not me saying these things. It's not like I'm this dude in Oklahoma that's like, disconnected from the world. I pay for 2 subscriptions, the Wall Street Journal and The Economist. The Economist's entire June 26th issue is all about China, and it literally spells out everything I'm saying right now. The Economist, a self-described left of center publication from London, the United Kingdom, holds these same views about China, and it goes through the history and how really Mao and then post Mao everything occurred politically, how they're holding on to power, and how they're literally they're going to take over the world through force. They previously, anyway, go read that issue. It's a bunch of great information if you're at all interested on this topic of potential war between the West and China. I think it's brewing. I don't see a way in which it doesn't come to a head.
We'll put a friendly wager on it then. How about that?
Yeah, give it 20 years. I think there will be
20. Okay, well, hold on. Anything can happen in 20 years.
Hey,
we need the Black Swan book out for that.
Hey, I'm not saying this is happening tomorrow. I'm saying I think it's unavoidable. And I think the longer that we allow China to build up, to be aggressive, to take over strategic military installations, the worse it's going to be for the West. Appeasement, right? That's what we did with Hitler in Germany. We appeased him until it was too late and we couldn't do anything about it. Appeasement is like feeding the alligator, hoping you're going to get eaten last. That's not the right policy.
You should listen to the guest that's coming on after you, because he's not talking about China, but he is talking about this very mentality. But you are a self-described conservative, right?
I am as center as you can get. I've taken a few different political tests, and like literally bullseye right smack dab in the middle. I would describe myself as a constitutional conservative from the perspective that I think that document's amazing and we should live by it as a country. If we don't, then let's just say fuck it. Let's all just have a bunch of different nations within a nation, because that's what it'll turn into. So socially, there's a lot of stuff I don't care about. I think they're fringe issues that people care way too much about. I like the Electoral College. It's meant to be there to protect minorities. Ironically, the Democrats want to get rid of the Electoral College. They want mob rule. And so mostly I align with Republican ideals, but I'll attack Republicans all day long.
Well, the reason I'm asking is to your espouse, it sounds like an interventionist policy, which is in the neocon movement has been their policy, but historic conservatism and constitutionalism would not espouse this very same ideal. And I find that to be part of the reason when I left the Conservative Party years ago was because they're always, hey, let's go fight someone over here. Let's go do this over here. And I'm not saying there's never. I'm not a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination. I am, however, very much a believer in the general non-aggression principle, and that applies to the government, that applies to the heads of state, that applies to the police, that applies. And now we'll probably differ on where exactly to that.
I'm actually on your side with that.
So, so to my question then was how then do we engage China with a non-aggression principle?
That's the problem. I think that we're running out of political tools by which to engage. I think that they literally do not care. They're going to do whatever the hell they want to do. And because of that, you're going to run out of mechanisms by which to engage other than a blow up, a powder keg situation. And again, we did it. If we don't learn how Germany came to power, how Hitler came to power, it was literally through global appeasement. Nobody wanted to deal with it.
Okay. Let me a couple things here, because this is important to distinguish what I'm not saying. What I'm not saying is we should sit around and not talk about China. We've had a podcast on this podcast about the Uyghurs. I have publicly written about the Uyghurs and talked about the Uyghurs and how's it genocide. And I think every American should get on Twitter right now and say that they are killing the Uyghurs and it is a crime against humanity. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's the first time they've been censored since Tiananmen Square, literally by the European Union.
The other thing is that we should look to China. I don't like saying defeat, because I think that invokes a little bit militaristic, more military type action than I'm thinking of. But if you want to beat in a competition, defeat China, they tell you how to beat them. You know how? Is you talk about them. That is the one thing in the world that scares them to death. All the things that you mentioned, Tiananmen Square, Hong Kong, Taiwan, it's all about this idea that scares the CCP to death. And that is the thing that scares them. In 1936, leading up to World War II, there was no way to communicate this message. Hitler was able to operate, by and large, in secret. And if you were in where I'm at, Granbury, Texas, or Oklahoma, all you had was the whatever radio station you got. And if you got the paper, you read the paper. That is not the world we live in today. The world we live in today is actually one that allows us to put unique pressure on politicals that they couldn't do historically. And so the reason North Korea is because they're 10 steps ahead of China. There's a reason they live like in the 1970s, because North Korea understands once the genie's out the bottle, you can't put it back in. China was opening back up. Now they've tried to tighten it back up. My personal opinion is they realize they done screwed up. It's gone too far. And they realize that the genie was out the bottle. And so they're trying to rein it back in. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's a slow game, but I don't think it's going to work. But
do you think they go to war with Taiwan to rein them in and bring them back under control?
I don't know. I hear there's a lot of smart people on the Taiwan stuff that have an issue. My concern,
because if that happens, that's the.
I agree. That's the spark point that you probably.
It is.
That's the line of potential no return.
Yeah.
So I have concerns about China fishing. I have concerns about all the stuff that you do. Maybe not the same level. I think the Taiwan issue is the one where it really becomes hard. And I'm not saying that there's a lot of philosophical things we could deal with on top. I'm not saying that. I think that that's the point where it's hard then to argue that they're not being imperialistic as some have. So if you go read certain books about how they do lending and stuff, some of the stuff they do isn't as predatorial as you might think. Some of it's worse, depending on what you know how you look at road stuff. But like the Dragon's Gift's a great book to go read some of their loan practices on Africa.
Yeah.
But Taiwan, and this is to go to Taiwan, what I have argued for is that everyone should come out and say that Taiwan is its own country. Go look up how many countries acknowledge Taiwan as a country. It's 14, I think. In Africa, there's only one, I believe, because you cannot get Chinese funding if you say that. So just say it. I don't care if it's true or not. Just say it. Because what happens? Look at what happened with China and Australia last year. The Chinese, Eric Bradshaw episode, whatever, on Inside the War Room, they wanted to pressure the Australians into how they wanted their news to run. And the Australians were like, no. So they pulled out. Guess what? So they're trying to put pressure on them. But I'm not saying it's the only way, but that is the first way to put pressure on the Chinese is talking, because they don't want the talking. I'm talking about the citizens. The citizens are separate.
I think it's a great move. I think we should. I join you. I advocate for this. Talk about them. Look at literally just suggesting, hey, we want to inspect the the health facility where COVID came from,
Yeah.
the coronavirus came from, that literally got Australian coal banned to China. Just them saying, "Hey, we want to inspect it."
Trump was like, "Hey guys,
point.
you created a bioweapon. You created a bioweapon. You're crazy. We hate you guys." And the Aussies are like, "Well, listen, Trump's kind of crazy,
Yeah,
but we
because
would
Trump
like
said
to see
it,
it.
nobody
We just
wanted
like
to
see it."
listen.
Like,
Yeah,
no. And so, but that,
Yeah.
but it's, so they can only do that so much. They cannot feed their own people. They cannot power their own people. They have a lot of weaknesses. And so, if you continue to press the issue, and again, to be clear, with the leadership, not just the average Joe. I'm not saying go harass some average Chinese person in the street. I'm talking about writing stuff that's political statements, pushing back against
right about Xi Jinping,
Xi Jinping.
literally.
Yeah. The other thing is,
just go at him. He is the government. He is the CCP.
when
He is
the Chinese went to the UN a few months back and they said, "Well, if you want to come inspect the Uyghur camps, come do it." Biden, in my opinion, Trump, whoever was in office, doesn't matter. I didn't vote for either one of them. The president at the time, should have called up Air Force One and said, "Hey, get on whoever the heck we send to inspect these things. Load it down, send it over there today." That's how you start to win this battle, because that's not confrontational. That's nothing. You're just doing what they say you can do, and that's what they don't. And so the other thing is to the European.
Have you watched the documentary China Hustle?
Mm-mm.
You need to watch that one.
Okay.
It's all about the reverse mergers out of China into the United States financial
Oh, yeah.
markets
Mhm.
to literally do nothing but steal from the United States citizens. And the Chinese are complicit. The government's complicit in falsifying those numbers. And this guy figured it out. And he's been trying to go to Congress. Nobody cares. Nobody's listening to him. I mean, hell, LeBron James is out there saying he loves China. I guess LeBron James doesn't really care about all these other issues that China, continues to.
That's the other thing that makes it tough, is that the elite of the elite are making billions of dollars. You go back last year,
That's it.
the German businesses were like, "Oh my gosh, y'all got to do something. The Chinese are kicking our butt." Well, part of that is because they struck these deals that they thought they could outmaneuver the Chinese. The Chinese outmaneuvered them, and now they're like, "Well, okay, hey, we want it fair." And Germany's like, "Well, if we piss off the Chinese, our citizens who need these imports, they can't afford those, so we'll be out." So you're seeing a lot of things happen, and I don't believe, and I could be wrong here, I just don't believe that China will be able to navigate the same way that it has. And I think a lot of their actions are trying to preserve what they have. And so we look at it as expansion, and on some level that's true. I think they're trying to preserve the power that they have because they feel that they're losing the grip. I could be wrong. We'll see. I'm just one dude in Granbury, Texas, to use your analogy.
Yeah, no, I think one of the most interesting things about all of China at the moment is that it now marks, they're about to have their 100th anniversary of the CCP, which is socialism and that party in China. It is the longest reigning socialistic regime in the history of the world. It actually surpassed that of Russia and the USSR. And so China has done something that Russia was not able to. And it was due to their ruthlessness, as The Economist put it this month. They literally said, and they criticized Russia for not being willing to kill unarmed citizens. That's what Xi Jinping criticized Russia on. They said, if you had any kind of gumption, if you had any kind of conviction, you would have murdered and slaughtered those people like we did in Tiananmen Square. You didn't have the resolve. You didn't deserve to have an authoritarian regime and a socialist government. That's what's required.
Okay. We are wild. I didn't expect us to get on China, but you know what? It was fun nonetheless. Want to get you back on, talk about energy and poverty and climate, all this stuff.
Hey, it's all wrapped into it. All renewables go through China. I mean,
so tell folks where they can connect and find you at.
Yeah, I don't write a ton about China, but Hefner.energy is my website. I hope you take a moment to visit it. If you read only one article that I've written, read The Social Dilemma and The Office, the platitudes of Michael Scott bouncing around the echo chambers of social media. It's a fun, creative piece. I'm trying to bring more levity to the situation. This was a heck of a lot less levity than I expected today, but still a good required discussion nonetheless. And if you need anybody to come speak on these issues, please reach out to me via the website.
Okay, shoot me that article, and I'll link to it in the show notes when we get off here. And yeah. Well, listen, I told you before we got on. I said we would talk about it. You said whatever. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
you go for it.
this
I'll
is
talk
whatever.
about whatever you want to talk about, and I'll
Well,
be transparent as can be.
Well, no, it just so for the listener standpoint, yeah, this was just like I said, how do we go in China? And then next thing you know, we're spending much time in China. One of the things, and I'll leave with this is that when I talk about talking about these issues is part of it. And in 2021, people just can't talk anymore. And so whether we agree or not on whether China's going to war or not, guess what? Me and you disagreeing doesn't impact whether or not we're going to China.
I hope we don't. I just don't see any.
No. I'm saying, but me and you disagreeing on it doesn't actually impact the policy of us going to war, right? But it's an exercise that needs to be happening because you're going to point out things, I'm going to point out things, and so hopefully that's one of the reasons I wanted this platform was different discussions that I don't normally get to get into. So I appreciate it, and we will link to all your stuff, Hefner.energy. And to your point on Twitter the other day, you asked the question about how often do you publish something that you wrote something and you hated?
Yes,
every single tweet. I'm like, is it who or whom? There, I don't even know, or did I put the comment after it's, or am I supposed to, or I should have said it this way. God, so I feel your pain on that.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. I have a newfound respect for everybody that puts out original content. It's hard work and it's a lot of time and effort. So congrats to you on everything you've built with War Room Media. It's not easy, and you've done a great job.
Well, listen, we'll get you back on. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And we will have I don't know, this is coming out, I guess, on Thursday. We'll have an episode either Friday or Monday. So talk to you then.